Restaurant mogul sees his ex-fiancée working night shift with twin girls who look just like him. Then, the rain was hammering against the windows of Romano's, the flagship restaurant of Marcus Rivera's billion-dollar empire. It was 1:47 a.m., and Marcus was about to discover something that would shatter his entire world. Marcus owned 37 restaurants across 4 states. His culinary empire was worth over $800 million. He'd been featured on the cover of Forbes, called the King of Modern Dining by Food and Wine magazine. But none of that mattered now. Because there, behind the counter of the all-night diner across from his latest restaurant opening, was Isabella. And beside her were 2 little girls who had his exact dark eyes, his olive skin, even the small dimple in their left cheeks that he'd inherited from his grandmother. Impossible, he whispered, staring through the rain-streaked window of his Lamborghini. 4 years. 4 years since Isabella had vanished from his life without explanation, right before their wedding, when he was still struggling to keep his first restaurant alive. Working 18-hour days, sleeping on the office floor, living on leftover pasta and determination. Today at 35, he was one of the most successful restaurateurs in the country. His face was on billboards. His recipes were bestsellers. His life was perfect. Except for the 2 little girls across the street who looked exactly like him. Both around 4 years old, both undeniably his daughters. The way they gestured while talking, the way they tilted their heads when concentrating, even the way they smiled. Everything was a perfect mirror of himself as a child. Marcus felt his heart stop. While he'd been building his culinary empire, collecting luxury cars and dining with celebrities, his children had been working at a 24-hour diner at 2 in the morning. He parked illegally and ran across the street, not caring about the rain soaking his $5,000 suit. The bell chimed as he entered the nearly empty diner. Isabella looked up from wiping tables. Her face went pale when she saw him approaching. The 2 little girls were sitting in a corner booth, coloring in old books while their mother finished her shift. Isabella. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Marcus, she stammered, automatically stepping between him and the children. They're mine. It wasn't a question. The resemblance was too perfect to deny. One of them even had the small birthmark on her wrist that ran in his family. Who's that man, Mama? Asked the braver of the 2 girls. Marcus felt like someone had punched him in the chest. That little voice, the way she looked at him with curious intelligence. She was everything he dreamed his daughter would be like. They're 4, aren't they? He said, calculating the timeline in his head. You were pregnant when you disappeared, when you left me standing at the altar. Isabella's hands trembled as she set down her cleaning supplies. Marcus, this isn't the time or place. For years, Isabella. His voice broke with emotion. For years of my daughter you hid from me. For years I'll never get back. One of the girls hid behind her sister, clearly frightened by the raised voices. Marcus forced himself to lower his voice, but the pain still burned in his throat. Why? Why did you do this to me? Isabella looked around the empty diner nervously, as if she expected someone to appear. You don't understand. I tried to tell you. I tried to talk to you. But people, powerful people, didn't want you to know. What people? What are you talking about? Mama, are we in trouble? Whispered one of the girls. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. His daughters, his own daughters, were afraid because of raised voices over money they should never have had to worry about. Isabella, Wait. He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away. I couldn't raise twins alone and work and give you the attention your career demanded, she whispered quickly. Some people said you'd never be ready for children, that your business would always come first. What people said that? But Isabella was already gathering the girls' coloring books, moving toward the door with an urgency that seemed about more than just avoiding conversation. I can't talk about it here. It's not safe. Safe? What do you mean it's not safe? Mama, I'm tired, said one of the twins, rubbing her eyes with small fists. I know, baby. We're going home now. Isabella pushed through the door before Marcus could fully process what she'd said. Some people didn't want him to know. People who had convinced her it wasn't safe to talk. What the hell did that mean? He stood in the empty diner, watching through the window as Isabella loaded his two unknown daughters into a beat-up Honda that looked like it might not make it another mile. For the first time in years, Marcus Rivera, the man who'd built a restaurant empire from nothing, felt completely powerless. But one thing he knew for certain. Someone had deliberately kept his children away from him. Someone with enough influence to make Isabella disappear and stay hidden for 4 years. And when Marcus discovered who had dared to steal 4 years of his life as a father, that person would pay for every missed bedtime story, every first step he didn't see, every birthday he wasn't there for. As he walked back to his car, cold determination settled in his chest. He'd survived food critics, impossible investors, and cutthroat competition to build his empire. Finding out the truth about his daughters would be easy compared to what he'd already overcome. But standing there next to the Lamborghini that cost more than most people earned in 3 years, Marcus realized something that disturbed him even more. Isabella hadn't just hidden his children. She was protecting them from someone. And that person was still a threat. Marcus spent the next 72 hours obsessively investigating Isabella and the twins. What he discovered made him sick to his stomach. She worked 3 jobs to support the girls, waitressing at the diner from midnight to 8 a.m., cleaning offices during the day, and doing catering prep work on weekends. Living in a tiny apartment in the worst part of town, struggling to afford daycare and groceries. But what really caught his attention were the photos on her social media. In every single picture, Isabella carefully hid the girls' faces, always photographing them from behind or with their faces turned away, as if she was deliberately keeping them invisible to someone who might recognize them. That's when Marcus discovered something that made his blood boil. Isabella was married. Her husband was Thomas Castellano, Senior Vice President of Castellano Development Group, one of the most powerful real estate families in the city. On Thomas's Instagram were dozens of photos of the perfect family, him, Isabella, and the twins at expensive resorts, fancy restaurants, exclusive events. Thomas presented himself as the girl's father, receiving congratulations in the comments about what an amazing family man he was. Marcus felt a rage he hadn't experienced since his hardest days building his first restaurant. Not only had they hidden his children from him, but another man was taking credit for being their father, using his daughters to build a public image as a devoted family man. He decided to dig deeper. Using his connections in the business world, Marcus learned that the Castellano family practically owned half the city's development projects. Thomas's father, Vincent Castellano Sr., had political connections that reached the governor's office. On Wednesday, Marcus hired a private investigator. By Friday, he had a detailed report that made him feel physically ill. Thomas had met Isabella when she was 6 months pregnant. According to witnesses, he'd convinced her that Marcus would never be a good father because he was obsessed with his career and would never put family first. Even more disturbing, Thomas had offered financial stability in exchange for her never revealing who the twins' biological father was. The investigator had uncovered old text messages between Isabella and her best friend, where she confessed to being terrified that Marcus would show up and try to take the girls away, and that Thomas had promised that would never happen if she kept the secret. But the worst was yet to come. Marcus discovered that Thomas had known his identity from the beginning. He'd researched Marcus when he started dating Isabella, knew exactly who the twins' biological father was, and had deliberately used that information to manipulate the situation. The messages showed Thomas bragging to friends about how he'd rescued Isabella from a workaholic businessman who abandoned her when she got pregnant. He created an entire narrative where Marcus was the irresponsible villain, and he was the hero who'd saved a struggling single mother. Marcus realized that while he'd been building his restaurant empire, Thomas had been building a different kind of empire. One based on lies, manipulation, and stolen fatherhood. The breaking point came when Marcus discovered that Thomas had used the adoptive father story to secure major business deals. In newspaper interviews about corporate social responsibility, Thomas was presented as an example of a young executive who'd generously taken on the responsibility of raising another man's children. The story had helped him close several high-profile development projects. Clients were impressed by his character and commitment to family values. The hypocrisy was sickening. Thomas was profiting financially and professionally from fatherhood he'd stolen from Marcus, while Isabella worked 3 jobs to barely make ends meet. But what disturbed Marcus most was a final discovery. Thomas had documented everything. The investigator found emails where he discussed with colleagues how keeping the biological father away was essential to maintaining the family stability. There was even a detailed plan for what to do if the real father ever showed up. Thomas not only knew about Marcus, he'd actively prepared to prevent any attempt at reconciliation. He'd coached Isabella on how to disappear if necessary, promised legal protection if Marcus tried to cause trouble, and even prepared an alternative story where Marcus would be portrayed as an unstable man trying to disrupt a happy family. Sitting in his penthouse office with all these documents spread across his desk, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since his poorest days. Cold, calculating rage. Thomas Castellano had completely underestimated who he was dealing with. Because while Thomas played manipulative real estate games, Marcus had learned something valuable building his empire from scratch. The difference between truly powerful people and people who just play at power is simple. Truly powerful people know how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. And Marcus Rivera had spent the last 4 years becoming very, very powerful. What Thomas didn't know was that every arrogant email, every documented manipulation, and every carefully constructed lie was about to become the weapon of his own destruction. Because when you steal 4 years of a father's life and document the betrayal like it's a business achievement, you're signing your own death warrant. Marcus spent the next week building a case that would make any prosecutor jealous. But this time, he wasn't just gathering information. He was constructing Thomas Castellano's complete and total destruction. The first step was hiring Elena Rodriguez, a family law attorney who'd gained national recognition for cases involving parental manipulation and fraud. Elena was known for her ruthless approach against men who used power and money to control women and children. "This case is worse than I initially thought," Elena said after reviewing all the evidence Marcus had collected. "Thomas didn't just hide your children from you. He created an elaborate psychological manipulation scheme to keep Isabella under his complete control. She showed Marcus evidence he hadn't even considered. Bank records indicated that Thomas controlled every aspect of Isabella's finances. She had no accounts in her name, no credit cards, no access to money that wasn't filtered through him. Everything went through Thomas. Look at this. Elena pointed to a series of emails she'd obtained through legal channels. Thomas meticulously documented how to keep Isabella dependent. There are messages where he discusses with associates how a woman with twins could never support herself financially, and how this guaranteed she'd never cause problems. Marcus felt his anger grow exponentially. It wasn't just about his children. Thomas had turned Isabella into a prisoner, using the girls as leverage to control every aspect of her life. But what really made Marcus's blood boil was discovering that Thomas had used his daughters to gain even greater professional advantages than he'd imagined. The real estate developer had applied for a position on the board of a major children's charity, using the inspiring story of having adopted 2 abandoned children as his primary qualification. In video interviews available online, Thomas spoke with practiced emotion about how he'd found a desperate young mother abandoned by the children's father, and how he'd decided to give this family destroyed by male irresponsibility a chance. The audiences always applauded when he described how the twins called him Daddy and how proud he was to be the only father they'd ever known. Marcus discovered that this narrative had earned Thomas not only his charity board position, but also major development contracts with family-oriented companies. His character as a devoted adoptive father had become a key part of his business brand. The hypocrisy was disgusting. Thomas was profiting financially, socially, and professionally from a lie he'd orchestrated, while the children's real father was being portrayed as an irresponsible man who'd abandoned his family. That's when Marcus discovered something that completely changed his strategy. Among the documents Elena had obtained was a custody petition Thomas had filed. He was quietly pursuing legal adoption of the twins, claiming Isabella's consent in the absence of the biological father. The petition portrayed Marcus as an unknown sperm donor who'd never shown interest in parental responsibility. "This is deeply troubling," Elena said, analyzing the document. "If this petition had gone through, you would have lost all legal rights to your children permanently." Marcus felt a chill. Further investigation revealed that Thomas had consulted multiple lawyers about terminating unknown father's parental rights. There was research in his browsing history about how to prove abandonment and document the biological father's unfitness. Marcus realized with horror that Thomas wasn't just hiding his children. He was preparing to erase Marcus from their lives permanently and legally. "We need to act fast," Elena advised. "But we also need to be strategic. If Thomas realizes we've uncovered his plans, he might accelerate the adoption process." That's when Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Thomas directly or immediately exposing his findings, he would start playing Thomas's game, but with completely different rules. Marcus used his restaurant industry connections to discreetly approach the children's charity where Thomas served on the board. Without revealing his personal connection, he offered to cater their annual gala at cost. The gesture secured Marcus not only access to the charity's exclusive events, but also the opportunity to observe Thomas closely, learn his habits, his weaknesses, and most importantly, document every lie he told publicly about his adoptive family. What Thomas didn't know was that every event, every speech, every interview where he repeated his fabricated story was being carefully recorded. Marcus was building a complete archive of evidence that would prove beyond doubt that Thomas's entire heroic narrative was a calculated fraud. But Marcus had an even more elaborate plan. Using his technology resources and business connections, he'd created a comprehensive digital dossier on Thomas's manipulations, including recordings, documents, financial records, and evidence of the fraudulent adoption attempts. The dossier would be sent simultaneously to 3 devastating destinations: the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee, the Children's Charity Board, and most importantly, an investigative journalist specializing in family corruption whom Marcus had met through industry contacts. Sitting in his restaurant Empire's headquarters at 3 a.m. with all the documents organized and his plan finalized, Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. Thomas Castellano had spent years building a reputation based on lies and manipulation. In 72 hours, all of that would come crashing down so spectacularly that he'd never recover. What Thomas didn't realize was that every lie he'd told, every manipulation he'd documented, every exploitation of the situation was about to become the instrument of his own complete destruction. Because when you build a career on falsehoods, it only takes one well-placed truth to make everything collapse like a house of cards. Marcus had learned a crucial lesson building his restaurant empire. Strategic patience always defeats impulsive arrogance. And Thomas Castellano was about to discover the price of underestimating a man who had much more to lose and much more power to fight back than he could ever imagine. The annual gala for Children's Future Foundation was packed with the city's business elite. Thomas Castellano, resplendent in his custom tuxedo, was preparing for his keynote speech about family values when his phone started buzzing incessantly. The first call was from his father. "Thomas, what the hell is going on? I'm getting calls from reporters asking about document fraud and family manipulation." Before he could respond, a second call came in from the charity's executive director. "Thomas, we need to talk immediately. We've received some very disturbing documents." Thomas felt his world beginning to shift when he saw the email that had just arrived. The sender was anonymous, but the subject line was devastating. 4 years of lies, complete evidence package. The attachment contained everything. Every arrogant email he'd sent. Every document where he planned to keep Marcus away. Every conversation where he'd boasted about stealing a family. Even the fraudulent adoption petition. On the second page, a DNA analysis confirming Marcus Rivera as the biological father of the twins, accompanied by a legal report detailing how Thomas had used psychological coercion and financial control to manipulate Isabella. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the gala presenter, "our keynote speaker is Thomas Castellano, known for his dedication to children and families." Thomas took the stage with trembling legs, unaware that Marcus Rivera was sitting discreetly in the back row, watching in real time as the reputation he'd spent years building crumbled. "I'd like to talk about integrity," Thomas began, his voice faltering when he saw several audience members checking their phones simultaneously. That's when investigative journalist Sarah Chin stood up. "Mr. Castellano, is it true that you've been impersonating the father of 2 children whose biological father was deliberately kept away through manipulation?" The silence was deafening. Thomas tried to speak, but no words would come. In the audience, phones lit up as people received the dossier Marcus had sent simultaneously to journalists, charity board members, and business associates. "According to documents we've just received," Chin continued, "you've profited financially and professionally from a false narrative about rescuing an abandoned family." Marcus watched Thomas crumble publicly. He felt no pleasure in the humiliation, only the cold satisfaction of seeing justice served. He stood up and left before anyone could connect him to the exposure. 2 hours later, he was at Isabella's apartment door. She opened it with red, swollen eyes, already knowing the truth had been revealed. "Thomas called screaming," she whispered. "He lost his board position. The charity is investigating him. His company is distancing themselves." "How do you feel?" Marcus asked genuinely. A tentative smile appeared on her face. "Relieved. For the first time in 4 years, I feel like I can breathe freely." The twin girls appeared at the door, looking at Marcus not as a stranger, but with the natural curiosity of children who'd finally learned they had a father. "Mama said you're our real daddy," one of them said directly. "Yes, I am," Marcus replied, kneeling to their level. "And if you'd like, I would very much love to be part of your lives." The next morning, newspapers across the city read, "Real estate executive exposed in family manipulation scandal." The state ethics board opened an investigation. The children's charity removed him from all positions. His development company announced they were reevaluating his role. Marcus received a call from Elena Rodriguez. "The paperwork is ready. Isabella has voluntarily agreed to joint custody arrangements. Legally, you are now recognized as their father." Meanwhile, Thomas, who just a week earlier had been considered one of the city's most promising young executives, found himself alone in his empty office. His wife had filed for divorce. Colleagues avoided him. Even his parents expressed their shame. Marcus spent that weekend at the Children's Museum with his twin daughters, watching them discover the exhibits while Isabella walked beside them, relaxed for the first time in years. "Daddy," said the younger twin, "what happened to Thomas?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "He learned that when you build your life on lies, one day the truth comes out and everything falls down. The best revenge," he told Isabella later, "isn't becoming the monster who hurt you. It's building something so beautiful that their lies become meaningless." Thomas had tried to use 2 innocent children as tools to build a false reputation. Now those same children were living proof that the truth always finds a way to prevail. 1 year after Thomas Castellano's spectacular downfall, Marcus Rivera watched his twin daughters playing in the garden of their new family home. The house in a quiet neighborhood was everything his sterile penthouse apartment had never been. Full of laughter, children's artwork on the refrigerator, toys scattered across every surface. "Dad, look what I drew," called Sophia, the more artistic of the twins. Marcus felt pride surge through him that no business achievement had ever matched. Isabella approached, carrying fresh lemonade from the kitchen. "Thomas finally signed the permanent parental rights termination," she said. "It's official. You're their only father now." Marcus nodded, but his attention was on the girls. Over the past year, he'd completely reorganized his life, promoting trusted managers to run day-to-day operations, working from home 3 days a week, never missing school plays or soccer games. He discovered that being a present father was infinitely more fulfilling than any professional recognition. "And Thomas?" he asked, more from curiosity than concern. "He's working as a junior associate at a small firm outside the city," Isabella replied, "making a fraction of what he used to earn. His ex-wife moved to California with their settlement." Marcus felt no satisfaction in Thomas's misfortune. Just the peace that comes from knowing justice was served. That evening during dinner, Sophia asked, "Daddy, why did Thomas pretend to be our father?" Marcus considered his words carefully. "Sometimes people make bad choices when they want something that doesn't belong to them, but the truth always finds a way to come out." Marcus's restaurant empire was thriving more than ever. Ironically, Thomas's exposure had generated positive media attention for Marcus. Business magazines interviewed him about balancing entrepreneurial success with family responsibilities. His story had inspired other fathers in similar situations. Marcus received hundreds of messages from men who discovered hidden children or were struggling with family manipulation. Elena Rodriguez had become one of the city's most sought-after family attorneys. "Your case changed how judges view parental manipulation," she told him. "Courts now take these situations much more seriously." A follow-up investigation revealed that Thomas had manipulated at least 2 other families over the years, always using similar tactics. Other victims began coming forward. Marcus realized his revenge had evolved into something larger, a movement to raise awareness about family manipulation and fathers' rights. On the first anniversary of being reunited with his daughters, Marcus organized a celebration at the same park where he'd first seen them. Elena made a toast to Marcus, who proved that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy, but building something so wonderful that their lies become irrelevant. As he watched his daughters laugh with their newfound cousins and aunts, Marcus reflected on the journey. Thomas had tried to steal 4 years of his fatherhood. But unknowingly, he'd given Marcus a gift. The opportunity to become the kind of father he might never have been without experiencing that loss. The real victory wasn't Thomas's downfall, but the family they'd built from the ashes of his deception. Marcus had learned that success wasn't measured in restaurant reviews or profit margins, but in moments like teaching a daughter to ride a bike. 6 months later, Marcus learned that Thomas had attempted to run for city council using a narrative of personal redemption. The campaign lasted 3 days until someone shared the newspaper story about his manipulative history on social media. Some people never learned that the truth has a long memory and infinite patience. Thomas had tried to use 2 innocent children as stepping stones to build a false reputation. Now those same children were living proof that authenticity always defeats deception. Marcus discovered that the best revenge isn't becoming the monster who harmed you. It's building something so extraordinary that your enemies become footnotes in your success story. Standing in their kitchen that night, watching Isabella help the twins with homework while dinner simmered on the stove, Marcus felt complete. He traded his cold penthouse for a warm family home, exchanged empty professional accolades for genuine love, and replaced a life of surface-level success with deep, meaningful purpose. "Come on, Dad," called Lucia, the more outgoing twin. "Family movie night is starting." "Coming, sweetheart," Marcus called back, taking Isabella's hand as they headed to the living room. And as they settled onto the couch with his daughters cuddled against him, Marcus realized that some stories don't end with revenge. The best stories end with love. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply discovering what was yours all along. Dear incredible listeners, thank you for joining Marcus, Isabella, Sophia, and Lucia on this emotional journey of lost family, manipulation, and ultimate redemption. Their story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in business empires or professional recognition, but in the love of family and the courage to fight for what matters most. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What was the most powerful moment for you? Did Marcus handle the situation correctly? Should he have confronted Thomas sooner, or was his strategic approach the right choice? Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? How did you handle manipulation or betrayal in your own life? What do you think makes a father truly successful? Please share your experiences below. Every comment helps me understand what resonates with you and inspires the next story I tell. If this tale of justice and family touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It helps me reach more people who need to hear stories about perseverance, love, and the power of truth. What kind of story would you like to hear next? Perhaps about second chances? About overcoming impossible betrayal? About finding love after heartbreak? Let me know in the comments. And remember, sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't in boardrooms or bank accounts. They're in bedtime stories at family dinners, and little voices calling you daddy and small hands reaching for yours. Until next time, keep fighting for what's yours. Keep choosing family over fame, and keep believing that love always finds a way to win. With gratitude and respect, your storyteller Raid Hard.